one, let's take a look at the second Antigone questions. Number one, at the start of this reading, the chorus says, when high gods shake a house, that family is going to feel the blow, generation after generation. I think the reference here is to Oedipus's house, his father, Laos, his mother, Jocasta, his children. The house is the family. And this family's cursed. And no one knows why, but they are. And there is this sense in which everyone pays. Antigone, Polynices, Ismene, Oedipus, Laos, Jocasta, that everyone pays. And it has nothing to do with personal responsibility. It has nothing to do with being punished for things that you've done. Your house is cursed. I believe that that's the idea, and it's a terrible idea, of course, but it's a very strong one in Greek myth and Greek thinking about families. I think that that's what the substance of it is. Number two, what is it that Haemon wants to persuade Creon to do? I believe he wants to persuade him to not kill Antigone. I think he wants to persuade him to not enforce this law that anyone who tries to bury Polynices will be killed, that he has to think about what the best thing is. He can't just think about his own power. He can't just think about the fact that she disobeyed the law, which she obviously did. And he has to do what's right for the city as well as himself. And that means perhaps being merciful. And more than that, being wise. That there are laws, and yes, they need to be enforced. But sometimes there are situations in which true justice is not simply mechanically enforcing a law, that there are other considerations. That, yes, she broke the law, but why did she break the law? And under these conditions, is it actually justice to enforce the law as it's stated? I think he's trying to persuade Creon to rethink the whole thing, and especially not to kill, not to execute Antigone. Number three, Creon tells Haemon that the city has to see the standards of a public man reflected in his private conduct. What is he getting at in terms of what he has ordered with regard to Antigone? Well, Creon has said earlier that you don't really know somebody until they have power. What kind of person they really are. And he's trying to prove himself as a leader and enforcing the law against his own niece, Antigone, is part of that. Proving that he is a competent leader. So I think what he's saying here is that a public person doesn't have the privilege of making decisions with regard to his own family that he might want to, as a family man, because his role as the leader takes precedence over that. There's obviously a conflict of interest here, classic conflict of interest, where Creon is the leader, he has certain public responsibilities, and then it turns out that the person who's actually disobeyed the law is a member of his family. That is a conflict of interest, right? Because his primary interest is to fulfill his role as the leader of Thebes, but he has this other interest because a member of his own family is the one who's broken the law. And I think Creon, as it turns out, tragically and mistakenly, thinks that he can't take into account. He would appear to be weak or partial if he were to be lenient with Antigone because she's a member of his own family. Number four, Creon says that failure of rule is the most destructive thing, seen as a general principle. Do you agree? Why or why not? Well, I mean, this is this whole speech about anarchy, That is that the worst thing that can happen is the failure of the law, anarchy, when there's lawlessness, because the whole city and the whole community is based upon law. And so once you start to not enforce the law, you're on a slippery slope towards lawlessness, anarchy. So the most important thing is to enforce the law. Failure of rule, when the political authority can no longer exert its power, it's the most destructive thing, because then we have chaos. Do you agree? Well, I don't know. It's definitely, an important thing. The laws need to be enforced. But is not enforcing a law the most destructive thing? I don't know if that's really true. It may just be an extreme position. Number five, provide an interpretation of the following exchange. Creon, who's to take charge, the ruler or the ruled? Hyman, there's no city that belongs in single hands. Creon, rulers I thought were meant to be in charge. Hyman, where you should be in charge is in a desert. I think that I would say the substance of this is that rulers have to take into account the opinions, the needs, the desires, the wishes of the ruled. When Creon says rulers were meant to be in charge, well, sure, if they're rulers, they're in charge, but they can't be in total charge, right? That is, they cannot assume that their power is absolute, and they have to be able to bend, and especially they have to be able to be sensitive to the opinions and desires of those over whom they rule. That's why Hyman says that you should be in charge in a desert, because you're not taking into account that there's this whole city here that has its own ideas and that they count. It's not just you ruling over the city in a vacuum. It's you ruling over a city, listening. You have to listen to what the city wants. And Hyman tells Creon, his own father, listen, the people think she's a hero, and you need to acknowledge that. Number six, given what she says before she's led to her own tomb, which is this dramatic thing at the end where she's going to be sealed up in this cave to die because of starvation or whatever. Do you think Antigone has any regrets for what she has done? Well, I mean, I don't know. As she's going down to the underworld to death, she regrets the fact that she didn't get to live her life. She never got to marry and have children. Or whether that constitutes a regret, I don't know. That's a matter of interpretation. She certainly feels the full agony of what's happening to her. It's not as if she's made of stone. She's not. And so we see that her decision to bury Polynices was not done without being fully aware of the consequences, and feeling those consequences. That is, Antigone has no death wish, I think we realize at the end. She wants to live her life. And this very strange sort of melding at the end of marriage and death. And, it's really quite something. So does she regret what she's done? I mean, again, that's a matter of interpretation. I don't know. Number seven, who in your mind is the more tragic figure, Antigone or Creon? Why? Well, of course, it's a matter of, your take on the play. I just put the question in because clearly, there are certain things going on with Creon that maybe the last question was really relevant to, because it was Creon's destroyed by the end of the play. He's still alive, but he's crushed. He's finished, and he's done it to himself. I mean, Antigone has done it to him to a certain extent by provoking this thing, by trying to bury Polynices. But Creon, in his lack of wisdom and mercy and humanity, in his insistence in prosecuting the law against Antigone and having her put to death. I mean, she eventually, obviously, she kills herself, right? But he's responsible. He's done it to himself, and his downfall really is in his own hands. So it makes him the kind of a classic tragic figure. Whereas, has Antigone done that to herself? I don't know. That's the idea of, does she have any regrets about things? I mean, it's not obvious that she really would do anything different. I don't think she would. So she's not really. I don't know if. I guess the idea did she make a mistake in trying to bury Polynesius is really a question. Whether she's really responsible for her own death, her own fate. So I don't know. I mean, I just put that in there because Creon's a tragic figure too. Antigone's a tragic figure. Creon's a tragic figure, and in a way, the play is about both of them. It's not just about Antigone. And Creon isn't all bad, and Antigone I don't think is all good. So they're both very complex figures, and the play, ultimately, who is this play about? More, is it about Antigone? Is it about Creon? Well, that's for the reader to decide.